Marketing is designed to sell us a product because a company wants to make money.
Yeah.
And therefore, what we know about security isn't necessarily true. And it goes back to that idea that security is a feeling. Security is not something I can go out and buy usually. I can buy things that give me a sense of security. And security has often, even in the technical space, been an afterthought. Things are not generally designed with security in mind. They're generally not designed with privacy in mind, which I think drives feelings of security and safety as well. Products that take security and privacy and safety as core tenets from their inception, it will, in my opinion, always be better products because we are thinking about how our users interact with them, how they feel about that interaction. And that is the thing that gives them the sense of safety.
Welcome to the season 3 of The Elephant in AppSec, the podcast to explore, challenge, and boldly face the AppSec elephants in the room. I'm Alexandra, your host and AppSec enthusiast and growth manager at Escape. Today, I'm joined by Curtis Koenig, a seasoned application security leader managing AppSec programs for global brands. At Gen, he secures all products through CI/CD integration, secure coding, and bug bounty program. Previously at Booking.com and Snap, he scaled security operations and has the authentication systems and streamlined compliance processes. With expertise in secure development and threat modeling, Curtis is a recognized authority in enterprise application security. In this episode, we explore how insights from neuroscience align with the decisions developers and security professionals make about securing applications. We also discuss how storytelling through metrics can reduce panic, drive software quality, and foster stronger team dynamics. If you are looking to learn from an experienced AppSec leader how he ensures his team's success through psychology, this episode is for you. If you enjoyed this podcast, don't forget to subscribe and follow it on your favorite podcasting app or YouTube. It's the best way to avoid missing future episodes. And with that, get ready to hear Curtis' opinions. Dive right in. Hi, Curtis. I'm very excited to have you on Elephant and an AppSec podcast with me. It was very nice, to chat with you beforehand in Amsterdam, which is it was great. I think I've learned a lot personally from that chat because I'm just starting my career, and I think you've been years, you have years of experience behind you, and I think especially a lot on the human side things because now you're leading a team of 11 people. I think you mentioned your team is growing right now and you've been hiring a lot. I think the human aspect is something we discuss a lot in AppSec and how human think is very important, whether it's relationships with developers or within your team or with a C-level executive. So it's something that very important. I've seen you've done also quite a lot of talks on the topic. Well, some of them I found at least on YouTube.
I've done a few here and there. Yeah.
Some podcasts as well, I think.
Few podcasts, been invited to talk to a few people. And yeah, as I like to call them the human beings, the mostly hairless monkeys, are a terribly interesting subject, like why humans behave the way they behave. And as you mentioned, as a people leader, I think that's stupendously important. I mean, I work in a technology company and we work on a very highly, tech-driven product and a highly tech-driven organization. But at the end of the day, it's all built by people. And how you motivate and support people matters to their output and matters to the sort of things they create and the way they think about problems and the way they approach solving them. Understanding people is a terribly interesting thing. And it's also sometimes very entertaining to sit on a park bench and watch them do things.
For sure. For sure. Sometimes you can also play around with them and set the traps to see how someone behaves. And
social engineering can be a really interesting topic and sometimes very difficult. And as a parent, I've tried to use some of those things. And I say try because it's not always successful with children.
Yeah.
To encourage their behavior in ways that I think is healthy for them and help them, achieve their goals at the same time. But your own children are often a very different problem, and they're also very good at social engineering. I don't know, you might not have kids yet, but for those of us that do, we know how good they are at trying to drive a wedge between two parents to get what they want.
For sure, and I think they already know. I have a little sister with who I have, really huge difference. So I kind of saw her growing up when she was small, and I think even sometimes she also came to me for certain things, which because she knows who would behave behave how in a certain way, and maybe she knows, I can influence parents.
As the elder of three children, I can say I wasn't always the nicest big brother, and occasionally I used my own nascent knowledge about human behavior in maybe not the best ways with my sisters.
Yeah.
It occasionally caused trouble, but hey, you learn things as you go.
Yeah, but that's how we learn. And I think in security, I saw that one of your talk you kind of asked the audience the question whether security is a mental construct or like something quantifiable. But how does, for example, the individuals may perceive security in a different way, whether a feeling, whether like a set of rules that you have to follow, a checklist. I've heard quite a lot too. But how does the way people perceive security influence their decisions or influence the decisions they make on a day-to-day basis? In your experience?
Well, the assertion I was making in that talk is that security isn't something that we can point at and say is a physical thing. Security is a feeling that we have as an individual. Either, I can, in a situation or a given location, I can feel more or less security on a personal level. And as a group, we can occasionally feel that as well. So it's a matter of perception. Like I can walk into a situation and feel very secure, where someone else would be very insecure. And there are a lot of factors that play into that. Some of those are, and I'll just give an example. Let's use the police, for example, especially in the United States. There are a lot of situations that I can walk into as a white male and not have any question about my security. However, if I were a minority in that same situation, I would not have that same sense of security given their interactions with the police in similar situations or what they've heard about interactions with the police. So I might feel very secure with a police officer standing in a certain location in a certain room where I happen to be, where another person might not. And so to me, that translates into other things as well. So how I feel about a given product and its security is the same idea. How I feel about how it operates, the sort of messages it gives back. The past history I have with that product, the past history people I trust have with that product. Because security is often a construct of trust as well. And that trust comes not just from my interactions directly with the product, but from what I hear from trusted sources about that or what I believe about various things. So security is a really funny thing in two ways. One is how we feel externally about it, but the other one is how we feel internally. And tying this back to sort of the people leader thing again, part of our job as people leaders is to create a space that our people feel secure in so that they can do the things we need them to do. And that isn't always the most evident thing either. When I say we want them to do the things we want them to do, I want my people to be able to go solve the problems I don't even know about yet. To do that, they have to feel secure that if something goes wrong when they're doing something, that they're not going to lose their job or they're not going to get yelled at. As a leader, that is a very important thing to do, to give people a safe space, for lack of better terminology, a secure space to be able to do that, where they should be able to experiment with things, have things not always work out perfectly, but as long as they haven't done a massive amount of damage that they could have predicted, then the next question is, what did you learn? How do you improve from that? And as long as they don't repeat the mistake, I, as a leader, tend to give them that space. And that's often my question is, what did you learn? How do we avoid this in the future? And let's not make this mistake again. And that is part of building that safe space as well, giving them that secure space to go do those things. So I'm talking about security as a feeling and how that affects us mentally as well. Because if I feel like I'm going to get in trouble, I'm not going to take that risk. If I don't feel invested in the product, I'm not going to feel invested in bringing up problems about it either. I'm just going to sort of let them go, or I'm not going to worry about them. So how we as leaders create spaces where people can bring us difficult conversations. And when I say difficult conversations, I'm not just talking about, things that happen between people, because that's always going to be part of leading people is, how they get along with each other. But their ability to look at our products objectively and say, hey, I see X and I see this wrong and I want to go do something about it. And giving them, the autonomy to be able to do that. And I think that fits into a model that I try to do very often, which is called MAP, and that's mastery, autonomy, and purpose. If people feel like they're becoming masters of a subject, they're gaining mastery, they're learning stuff, that helps them have value in the work they're doing. If they have autonomy, which is part of this security thing we're talking about, they feel like they're in a safe enough space where they can make decisions about their day-to-day interactions and the things they have to get done. And that they know where the boundaries of that are. Like there's certain things we should know we're not allowed to do, or we need to ask permission, or we need to ask like about priorities or other things. But as long as they're within that bounded space, they have the autonomy to do what they're going to do. And then purpose. So they can then connect those first two things. I'm mastering a subject. I have autonomy about what I'm supposed to do. Now I understand the purpose of what I'm doing and how that connects to the output of the work I'm doing, or the goals of my team, or the goals of my organization, or the goals of my company. If you tie those three things, you very much help, in my opinion, create high functioning, high value employees. They are the people who care about your business. They care about other coworkers. They care about how they interact. So you're building teamwork. You're building all kinds of things with that. And I know this has been a long-winded answer about how security fits into that, but security is a feeling. But I think that's the root of all of that. That if people don't feel safe, that they're not going to go do those things, and you can't build organizations that do that sort of work.
Was there a situation where you felt like you gave too much autonomy, or someone kind of abused maybe the autonomy that you gave to them?
I can say, luckily, I haven't had that problem yet.
Mm.
And I think that also comes from learning how to lead. As a leader, I'm big on intent-based leadership. If people understand the intent, and this is, I'm trying to remember his name. There is a naval submarine commander. I saw his TED Talk. I read his book. His name is escaping me right now. But he wrote a book about intent-based leadership that I found really, David Marquette, this guy's name. He wrote a great book about it. And what he basically says is, if you tell people the intent of what you want to have done, I might not always know the best way to get there. And I'll really admit that to most of the people who work for me. Like, I hired you because you're really good at something. And in fact, you're better at it than I am. And that's what I'm always trying to do, is hire people who are better at something than I am. So I've hired you to do this thing, and you're better at it than I am. Here's where I want to go. This is the intent of what I want done. I don't know actually how to get there. So you're going to have to figure that out. And that's the autonomy part of it. So if people understand where you're trying to go, then you've set up the boundaries as a manager as well, saying like, okay, look, here's our goals for the year. These are the things we have to get done, or our goals for this period, for example. Here's the things we have to get done. If anything you're going to do compromises one of these things, that's when we need to have a conversation. That's also why I have weekly one-on-ones, so I can understand where people are and what they're thinking and sort of what's happening. And that's also the opportunity for them to look at me and go, hey, I have these two things. I think they're of equal importance. I'm not sure which one to do. Which one would you like, which one do you want me to weigh in on? Those are my favorite conversations as a manager. Like, hey, let's talk about priorities and your ability to meet stuff. I'm like, hey, how do we weigh that out? And how does that fit into our business stuff? So, I think as a leader, you're setting yourself up for success if you're helping people understand the intent of what you need them to do and where the team needs to go, and they've understood the priorities of the organization. Autonomy fails when you don't give people boundaries, because then they think they can go do whatever they want. And yeah, they can do anything. That's not exactly what you want. But, boundaries help people understand where they can play the game. That's why games are interesting, because they have boundaries and rules. Games without rules are interesting for a little while, but then they quickly get boring. You can see this in children as they invent games. If one of them is the rule maker, it can get a little interesting. So yeah, autonomy can go wrong. You're not wrong there, but I think as a leader, you can do things that create a space for autonomy to be super successful.
And you mentioned before also like how perception of the product influence the way how we secure them. So when application security will also use a lot of tooling. So do you think our perception of certain tooling may lead us to use them or not use them, or not use those tools?
Oh, absolutely.
Use them in a way, that maybe you would deprioritize just because of that. Not what compliance says to you, but because of that human perception.
One of the most famous examples is actually out of my past. So, early in my career, I worked at Microsoft, and one of the first products I really got to sort of put my hands on was Windows XP. And we had built a lot of new in the original version, there was a lot of new stuff in there. And one of the things that came out of the work on Windows XP, I can't remember if it was XPSP2, was the administrator notification, like, hey, this thing wants to do this thing, click this box to give it permission. That showed up so often that we could see that where people got blind to that, and they would just, they weren't reading the box. They were just so intent on getting something done that they were clicking allow. And that's a common way, like people, and that was people getting mad at getting told too much about a security object and then actually lowering their overall security. So yeah, you can do all kinds of things, like especially in application security. One of the core problems we have is, people go out and they start to do static application security testing, SAS. Those tools will find all kinds of stuff depending on your code base. A lot of them are going to be false positives at first. And a lot of them are probably going to be low severity security values. At least in my history, that has been very true. The first time we turn one of these tools on a code base, the number of issues that come back is staggeringly high and scares the living crap out of most engineers. And the first thing I usually tell people, what I've learned is, number one is when we go into these conversations, I'm going to tell them, the first time we run this, there's going to be a lot. Just relax. Like a lot of this is, it doesn't know the code base. We're going to have to tune it and teach it. And there's going to be a false positive rate that we need to determine and then try to get below. Let's just use the Pareto rule as the simple rule of thumb. That's a great way I like to start. Like, hey, let's just get false positives under 20%. That tells us we're doing okay. We're going to lower these over time. We're going to continue to learn. Okay. That calms people down a little bit because, you flip one of these tools on, all of a sudden you have 800 issues, in a code base or more in many cases. And then the second thing is, how many of these are issues that really matter? So the other thing I've traditionally done when I come in and we start really new SaaS tooling or the org has never run it is, okay, we're only going to worry about the criticals for now. And that bucket is going to be much smaller. Like if you look at the bucketizing of issues in most of these tools, you got a lot of lows, you get then slightly less mediums, and then you have slightly less highs, and then even smaller number of criticals. Okay, let's just focus on criticals for now. Like, let's ignore this other stuff. We'll get to it, but let's ignore it. And then you slowly work your way down the stack. And that is an example of too much information causing people to think that something isn't secure because of the way it's working, or they begin to ignore the output from it because it's so chatty and so noisy. They don't know how to sift through the entire data set. And so you have to cut down a data set in order for them to be able to focus and to be able to comprehend and to be able to ingest what then has to be done and then to make real progress. And so I think that's a really good example of the sort of tooling, especially in application security, that can be really noisy. And that's true of a lot of tooling, security tooling. If you haven't tuned it and taught it and thought about it, you're going to get a lot of noise. And then it's very easy to get lost in the noise and have difficulty finding the little nuggets that actually move you forward in a positive and meaningful way.
So would you say then that the metrics actually help to reduce the stress? If we talk, back again to the feelings, so the metrics are kind of then required to reduce also the stress and reduce uncertainty. Because kind of neuroscience, teaches us about like how we process fear, how we process risk, how we process uncertainty. So metrics is something absolutely necessary to influence the human behavior?
Metrics are how we tell a story, and that's how humans relate to the world. We relate to the world in stories. That's what we do. We tell stories. Heck, I've been telling stories in this whole podcast. And the metrics you choose or the story you're choosing to tell the people who are reading them. Everybody wants to talk about, oh, look at all the things I found. Like, here's this raw metric of what I found. That's great, but what does that mean in your story? I often choose in AppSec programs not to use raw counts. I don't find that those metrics are super great. There is a great talk by somebody I know named Rafael Los. He's been around in the industry for a super long time. He gave a great talk about 10 years ago about the five most, I think it's the five, I can't remember what he titled it. It's a really good talk on metrics that matter. And I actually use a bunch of those metrics because I think they're really good. One I really love is the weighted risk metric. Basically, you take all of the critical issues and you multiply them by 5. You take all the highs, you multiply them by 4. You take all the mediums, multiply them by 3. You to, you get, and you get this number. And then what you do is you chart that number over time. You can also, in his metric, he uses, what's the criticality of the business? I find that often most businesses don't know the criticality of their applications. You can try to run them through that and maybe pick it up later. But if you just want to start off, you can just set that to a 1 and just sort of move on. But what you can do is then create a trend that goes over the months as you start, and you can start seeing whether it's going up or down. And that's a pretty good, in my experience, rule of thumb as to how well a team is performing against some of these tools. And I think it's a decent metric. It's not a super complex metric. It's not a later stage metric. It's an early stage metric. It's as we say in the US, the finger in the wind. I know which direction things are going. Yeah. I can't exactly tell you a whole lot of other things, but I know which direction you're going. But those metrics, that's much better than going, oh my God, look, you have 500 criticals, whatever the hell the tool spits out. That turns it into something that people can ingest. I mean, you may want the raw numbers to understand other things. There's also a bunch of metrics that we run internally that are for operational uses that I would never show to a team.
To your team or to the
my team uses them operationally to make sure our tools are running and the things are doing what they're doing. But if I showed them to somebody else, they might panic. Or become very concerned because the number of things we see that are raw. These are unfiltered. We haven't put them through false positive testing. We haven't put them through false negative testing. The tools don't always know if we have other protections in place. They just throw out issues that they see. And we use those metrics to tune the application and then tell that wider story. And like I said, those other metrics, in my opinion, are more important. Like how long does it take you to fix something that's an interesting metric. How long between introducing the same issue is a really interesting metric. Because that's going to happen too, where especially in software, you're going to fix something and then later on somebody else is going to fix something else and that may reintroduce the problem. How often that happens and the time distance between those two things is a really interesting thing too, because it tells you more about your software quality. And that's also the thing I try to do in security is I tend to try and make these stories more about software quality than about the scary, and I use air quotes there, scary security thing. Let's talk about software quality, because as software quality increases and security increases with that, the product gets better. And as the product gets better, customers begin to notice that. They begin to notice that it's solving their problems in different ways. And that goes back to that perception of security. If our customers, especially in my world where we're making security products, if my customers perceive that the product is suddenly doing a better job, that's good. And then that also shows up on external metrics. Like there's plenty of third parties out there who do testing, especially of security products. And I think we're pretty proud to have a really strong history of scoring very well in many of those external tests. And we want to keep doing that. Because that's an external marker. Like I said, it goes back to the trust thing. What do customers trust? They trust the information from people they trust. So if we're betting that customers trust some of these external third parties or people that they know who are techie and can understand that stuff, trust them as well. And then they give us good word of mouth because of the way we score on these things. Is that a bit of a social engineering? Yeah, because it doesn't speak to how good or bad those tests might be. It just says they exist and we score well on them. I mean, I think that second question is a deeper question to ask, and I like asking them. But for now, I think that is ephemeral to the what we're getting at here.
And how do?
So yeah, I think that to your original question, metrics are super important. They're the story you want to tell, and you should pick your metrics based on the story you want to tell, and you should be able to tell that story convincingly. That takes practice. That takes thought. It's not just something that's going to magically happen because you pick some metric to pump out numbers or a chart or a graph to tell some story. You've got to know the story you want to tell.
Yeah, I mean, it takes practice for sure, for sure. And I think it takes practice to be as well sometimes direct on the point that you want to convey, which is not always easy because if you have like 10 different metrics, sometimes you just want to show all of them, but it doesn't really, it just kind of dilutes attention from the main thing that you want to convey. And I think that's what takes really a lot of practice to actually limit yourself and focus on what you really want. You mentioned software quality, that you really think it's very important within the organization. So how do you, for example, ensure that developers live and breathe, the software quality and focus more on that rather than just doing their thing and kind of panicking when they have to fix criticals? Like, how do you actually make sure, from a, let's say, psychology perspective, that they really do change their perception, I would say.
Okay, so there's a couple of things I think I want to jump into there. The first is sort of closing the loop on the metrics story, and that is that metrics, if done really well, drive themselves and help people understand for themselves and look at what's happening around them. So I love using metrics because they can also create a sense of competition where two teams want to get better. That's closing out the metrics part. Again, more storytelling. How does that fit into software quality? Well, if you look at a majority of security issues, they're quality issues. Like, race condition that can slow the system down is a great example. Or bugs that cause the system to crash. And I'm going to say crashing isn't always a security problem. Sometimes things should crash. We shouldn't try to handle all exceptions because that leads us to some dark places sometimes. However, if framed correctly and people understand how it fits into the quality of their software and that fixing these sorts of issues then have longer term outputs. And then the last part of that is, how do you keep people from panic? That was a really interesting thing you say there. Like, number one is don't panic. Avoid panic. Panic is never, in my opinion, productive unless you're running away from a situation like being chased by a lion. That's one of the few places panic is good. We're talking life or death. I'm going to actually die. Like, most of the things we experience in the modern world aren't that. Our brain, which was developed on the savannas of the world, especially in Africa, we're developed to run away from danger. I'm not chased by lions regularly. That's not a problem for me. And I think it's not a problem for most humans, but our brains haven't evolved out of that. And so panic is a really interesting thing. So how do we avoid panic? One of those ways is making sure people are aware of what these things really mean. The second is I'm building application security programs, or I'm trying to build application security programs where people get lots of information early. So they're not getting it late in the game. If I tell you super early before you ever release the product that, hey, I've detected a critical issue that needs to be fixed, I've given you lots of time to deal with it. I've given you time to ingest the problem. I've given you time to think about how you're going to deal with the problem. And I've given you time to fix the problem before it actually becomes a problem. It's a threat. That's why we call it a threat. And I think that's the other part of this is you have to, everyone wants to talk about shift left or whatever the buzzword is now. It's really about early information dissemination to teams. And if people have time and you've told the right story, now they have understanding, now they don't panic. Instead, it's more of I have this thing to deal with. How do I fit it in my schedule? Okay, now we get this thing done. People panic when you threaten something else. So, you're coming up on a release day and it's 2 days out and all of a sudden I have a brand new critical issue. That is a different thing. If I have a brand new critical issue, because then we need to ask the question of why did this get introduced now? Why did you make a breaking change that could cause something like this 2 days before release? Why would you do that? I can tell you again from experience in Windows, I've seen that happen. We're trying to fix an issue. We create a critical issue. It's right up against, gold release. And then we have to make a decision. Is the bug that I fixed lower severity on the output here? And if the answer is yes, often we would just back out the change and go, okay, we'll live with this other bug. That's not a security bug. That's, yes, it has a performance impact or something else. And then we'll keep that in mind and we'll continue dealing with this in the next version because we need to release this thing. And then we can deal with it later. That is a valid way of dealing with issues and saying, hey, we're going to back out this change because the thing I fixed that caused this is less severe than this. But that goes back to the original point. Like, if I give people time, information, and understanding, then they don't panic. They just plan.
Wow. It depends, I think, sometimes also on the character and the personalities, to be honest. For sure, there will be definitely some people who are more calm under the stress and some who, no matter what you give to them, they are going to panic. At least that was in my personal experience.
I would argue that panic is the combination of threat and time. If I have a threat and lots of time to deal with it, then I'm less stressed about it. But if I have a high value threat and small amounts of time, that's when panic tends to set in.
Yep. Usually when you have to ship fast, that's when panic also sets in because that's where I think the time at something that's harder to influence when you are within the organizations, if you are, let's say, on a lower level in the hierarchy, because then it's the deadline is kind of imposed. on you as well. And it's funny you mentioned the like shift left, the buzzwords, etc. And I know when we talked before, you mentioned you were immune to marketing as well. Like, how would you recommend to someone to avoid, the being influenced maybe by buzzwords, or like being actually being influenced by what's being set upon you by the market?
I mean, I think that's an interesting question because at its root, marketing is psychological, designed to prey on our weaknesses. And you're not just going to magically be immune to those sorts of things. Like we all have our weaknesses. I'm not saying I'm perfect. I am saying I tend to be very critical of those things. I find that kind of marketing super interesting. Again, this is my behavior. This is my, why would you say that kind of thing? But I'm also a skeptic from my years in security. So for me, it's more about, that's an interesting claim and then seeing how they back up that claim. I'm always looking at the fine print. I'm always looking at the little asterisks at the bottom of notes to see what they say.
Okay.
That's the interesting stuff. Like, hey, we guarantee this forever. We only guarantee it if you only ever use it in your bedroom and never show it in the light of day and use it between the hours of 10 p.m. and noon. That's it. Like, okay, you're being really specific there. Like that's not exactly what I think either. So I think that's part of it, is you have to be critical, and that's a skill set. Critical thinking is something you have to build up. I took a great class when I was at Microsoft. It was taught by an external party, and it was called was it critical decision making? I think it was called critical. It basically talks about how we can ask very pointed questions to get at the root of problems. It was a really good class. I think I probably have the book behind me on my shelf, and I read it occasionally to remind myself of stuff. When two people are doing it, it can seem very adversarial. But it is about getting to the root of why we think the way, why we believe something. Like, okay, you said this. What does this mean? What does that mean? How do you back that up? And I think that critical thinking thing is important. Like when you hear statements, especially in marketing, the first question is, who is making that statement and why? What is their goal? Usually their goal is to sell you something. And some marketing is obviously done in a fear state. Why? Because if you engage the amygdala and you get people in the fight or flight state, they're not using their higher brain functions to think about stuff. And your neocortex evolved later, which is part of the reason it does all of our critical gradiated thinking compared to the amygdala. And this is the armchair, neuroscientist in me. As a former biologist, I'm stupendously interested in this. I'm by no means an expert, but I would say I've learned a great deal. And if you understand when your fight or flight kicks in and you can feel it, then you can also counter it and get your neocortex back, which is one of the very first talks I ever gave at a convention. I think I called it Knowing Where One's Towel Is, or the Neurobiology of Decision Making. You can look it up on YouTube. It's a talk I gave at SkyDogCon, I think in 2012 or 2013. I'm not saying it's a great talk, but I think it's a terribly interesting subject, especially for incident responders. Like if you can learn when you're in fight or flight, and I learned it by doing real world incident response, like going out and rescuing people. I used to do like search and rescue stuff. Yeah, I used to do search and rescue. Like go out in the mountains and look for people. But that applies to things like security operations centers. Like, oh, I have this high stress. Oh, I'm in fight or flight. I recognize that. Here's the things I can do to calm myself down and get my neocortex back on, and then make great, get that higher functioning part of my brain to make good decisions versus this amygdala, which is this sort of lizard brain that I still have that only does two things. It runs away or it fights. That's it. That's all it's got. If you can control that, that's the thing. And the same is true in marketing. They try to flip on our emotions. They try to flip on various things to get us to act in certain ways that they want us to. Like, oh my God, I perceive a threat. I should buy this product. Or, oh my God, I want to seem, more critically important to my social group. I need to have this thing that has this logo on it to give me prestige or whatever it is. When you begin to understand how these things work, you can take them apart and also control your own response to them. And I think that becomes the critical thinking part, which is sort of where your question's getting at. Like, how do you do that? And that comes from, again, it's that first question. Who's asking me this, or who's telling me this, and why? What is their motive and outcome? Okay, now if I dig into this and actually look at the data, how true is what are they saying? How true is what they say are they saying? That didn't come out in a proper English sentence, but I think you understand what I mean. Like, yeah. And then I can also ask the secondary question is like, are there other competitors in the market that do this better than they do? What is the problem they're trying to get at? do I actually have this problem?
I
That's
think that's
really,
probably the first question to ask in general, because
yeah.
that's do I have this problem is kind of more important
I get
than
a lot of cold, as you can imagine with my job, I get a lot of cold call
yeah.
emails from vendors trying to sell me stuff.
Hmm.
And, and, and I'm also part of an investment group that's a, sort of an angel investor type. Whenever we're looking at pitches, my first question, if they haven't done a really good pitch, and sometimes we're dealing with startups that don't have a lot of experience, I'm always usually asking, what's the problem you're trying to solve? Tell me in 2 sentences the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Now, tell me in 2 more sentences how your solution is better than everybody else's solution in the market. Those are the 2 things I want to know first. As an investor, before I put any money on the table, what's the problem you're trying to solve? How well, because that tells me how well you understand it. If you take more than 2 sentences, you probably don't understand the problem very well. And if you can't answer it also shortly why you're better than your competitors, you're also not looking at your competitors and you're not being able to say why you're a better choice. Those are red flags for me right away. Those 2 questions very quickly remove a lot of stuff off the table for me. But it's the same thing with the marketing you're asking about. Do I have this problem? And if the answer is no, then why do I care?
Yeah, that's usually the problem. At least in security, I think quite often it's already within the organizations, within the businesses, the problem, it's being treated not always as the first thought, which is it's very pity, but it's already not, the degree of urgency is not the same. And when it comes to as well then tooling or others, it's also the hard part is to also the degree of urgency. It's just if it's not there, it's very hard to create it. And I think it's a pity to create that, because in the end you're doing something that's not really useful for
Yeah.
for the people. So it's a bit it's hard. Yeah, that's I think the hard part, at least that I see in the market. And I think one like actually I'm very also curious, because you have a technical experience, you have like a neuroscience behavioral experience, and also like leadership experience, and you understand how business work. Like I think in one of the podcasts that I've seen with you, you mentioned like you have to understand what business is trying to do, what your customers want. Like, was there a particular moment when you realized, or someone who helped you, for mentorship, okay, these are the important things I have to focus on to succeed in application security?
I don't think any one person helped me with that. I think it was more me stepping on landmines, for lack of a better term. Like I made mistakes along the way. And you're going to make mistakes. And the question
Yeah.
is, did you learn from them? And what did you learn? Well, these are the things I learned.
Yeah, do you
I
have
learned by
an
having bad
example?
leaders. I've learned by having bad leaders how that destroys an organization, how that demotivates people to get things done. I also learned by seeing good leaders who were able to motivate people in different ways. I saw good leaders ask good questions to get people to think about stuff versus bad leaders who led by dictate. Do this because I say it, not because I'm going to help you discern on your own. The behavior, I'm a generalist, is I think the best description for me. People will say I'm a specialist in application security. I think I'm a generalist. I I actually align myself more with people like Da Vinci. He's drawing, he's doing biology, he's anatomy, for like he's making these machines, he's doing things on the stage, he's painting paintings, he's doing fresco, like he's just doing all this stuff. I think he might have had ADD, which I have as well. My brain is just very drawn to a wide number of topics, and I dig into them very quickly. I get some mastery of it, and then I move on to the next thing, which makes me sort of a generalist. It's the same in security. Application security just happens to be what I'm doing now. I've done a bunch of other stuff in security as well, and I will probably do them again. I also think that's what sets me up to be a really good CISO, because of this learning, I've learned how to ask questions. I've become enough of an expert, and I say that with a very massive grain of salt, enough of an expert to know enough to be really dangerous in probably every single area. But I can ask really good questions of the people who are even better experts than I to clarify misunderstanding or to clarify direction. And that bit of human bit, I think, is, like you said, was part of what makes me a good leader, which I also learned from, I'm going to be honest, the scouts. Wood Badge is a training that we give and that I have worked on a couple of times that I love. I think it helped me become a much better leader by thinking about the people I'm leading. Simon Sinek was also a huge influence on that. He's one of my favorite writers on leadership. He's really good. I mean, I'm also relentlessly unhappy with myself, which I think is just part of how it goes.
What?
I'm because I think I can always improve. And that's just part of the way it works. I don't think I'm ever going to be perfect. And because of that, I'm constantly saying, well, how can I do something better? It also causes me to question a lot of stuff. So when you ask, like, how do I operate with marketing and all those things? It's because I'm always asking why. I'm always looking at, well, why do I believe this? Why do I think that? What's the data that leads me to this? What data would change my mind on this particular topic? If I saw X, would I change my thinking on this or that? That is just part of how I operate. To me, that's just natural. Like I get that most other humans may not operate that way. And I actually have a psychologist friend who once said to me, like, you're stupendously interesting. I've never met anyone who questions their core beliefs as often as you do and in as methodical a manner as you do. Like, he found that really interesting. And I was literally going, why do I believe this? He's like, why are you even asking that? Most people just go, I believe this, and then move on. And this is why we see people ignore data that's contrary to their deeply held beliefs, because as humans, we would generally just discount that stuff. I seek that out, and I seek it out as a professional manner as well. Like, that's great. Like, show me why we're here and why we're doing this and these things. I don't know. I mean, and I think you've hit the button that I've never been able to answer. Like, why am I the way I am? I actually don't know, but it's probably a function of the things that have happened in my life shaping the way I think of and perceive the world. I hope that makes me a really good manager. I hope that makes me a really good leader, because I care about the people that I lead, and I care about getting things done, and I care about their lives having as much meaning as mine. So yeah, the short answer is I don't know. The longer answer is there's a bunch of crap that happened in my life, and I learned from it, and I watched, and I said, well, I don't want to do that. I want to do this. And then I asked a lot of questions about how I can do things.
Was there a moment when one of your core, like by asking those questions, that one of your beliefs have changed? Like there was something that you really thought is the case, and then you kept on asking yourself, and and then seeking the information, and maybe someone gave you this information, and it's completely changed your view.
There are several of my core beliefs that have changed pretty heavily over my lifetime, and I won't dig into them because they're not exactly security or anything. So more personal. They're more personal stuff. But I wouldn't say it was one person or one thing. It was more a series of questions, like, why do I believe this? Okay, I believe it because of X. Well, is X true? Okay, is there contrary evidence to X? Well, there is contrary evidence to X. Okay, then should I consider my core belief? Okay, what does that mean to who I am as a person? How does that change how I operate and act? What does that change in certain relationships that I might have? And that process, especially for the really big changes in my life, came over years. It wasn't like someone flipped a switch. It's a journey of 1,000 steps. It began with me asking a question and ended with me going, okay, that thing I used to believe doesn't make sense anymore in light of this evidence that I now see. And again, what would cause me to change? Like, what evidence would you have to give me to change back? And I think that's the interesting thing too. And that's true of almost all my beliefs. Like, what evidence? I'm very knowledgeable about what evidence I would accept for my thought process or my beliefs to change. So it's not like a snap switch. It's a very methodical process. I've joked with a lot of people that I feel like Herodotus. I think I got the guy right. Herodotus was a Greek who was looking for an honest man. I think I'm like Herodotus, and I'm looking for a rational man.
Okay.
First, I want that rational man. When I say man, I mean human being. I want that rational man to be me as much as possible. But at the same time, I want to find them in the world, because I think that truly, fully rational people are not terribly often. Most people will not question their core beliefs. They will not look into that place that makes them uncomfortable, because their core beliefs are who they are as a person. And if you think you're wrong about something that you vehemently defended for a long time, that's a difficult place to be. I mean, it changes a lot of your life and the relationships you might have. And that can be scary for people because, again, we're mostly hairless monkeys. We're gregarious. We like other people. And if I change my closely held beliefs, that may change the group of people that orbit around me. I may lose people I really care about. And that can be problematic for people.
Yeah, I think at least throughout the life, at least you do change the perception of people.
Yeah.
Because in the beginning you start a bit with the pink glasses, and then kind of people disappoint you more and more, and you lose them throughout the way.
It's very easy to wear rose-colored glasses. It's very
Yeah.
easy to go through life without questioning what's going on around you. It's far more difficult and uncomfortable to ask why and seek truth.
For sure. And speaking about truth, I think I came around one of your statements where you said like everything we know about the security is a lie. You know that
Yep.
you said. Why did you
That was a fun
pick?
talk.
Yeah, why did you pick that? And what do you think needs to change maybe the most urgent, or like more urgently in how we think and approach security?
Well, and I think you've interestingly gone through my background. Most people have never seen that talk, and I actually think it's one of my worst talks because I don't think I had it worked out very well. But I think it brings up an interesting point. And again, this is marketing, number one. We have marketing that tells us certain things. That marketing is designed to sell us a product because a company wants to make money.
Yeah.
And therefore, what we know about security isn't necessarily true. And it goes back to that idea that security is a feeling. Security is not something I can go out and buy usually. I can buy things that give me a sense of security. I can go and buy better locks for my door. I can get a dog to guard my house or whatever that is. It gives me a better sense of security. And that's what it is. It's a sense of security. It is not actual security because all of those things are circumventable, which is what I learned in lock picking. Like, that's a great lock, but I take these things and boom, I've got it open and I didn't need your key. Like, all security has limits. And the question is, where are your limits that give you that feeling of security and that feeling of safety, which I think is really the thing we haven't talked about, is that safety is that thing we are seeking. And so, yeah, all security is technically a lie because we're telling each other these stories to scare the living crap out of each other to get them to go do stuff. And security has often, even in the technical space, been an afterthought. Things are not generally designed with security in mind. They're generally not designed with privacy in mind, which I think drives feelings of security and safety as well. Products that take security and privacy and safety as core tenets from their inception, it will, in my opinion, always be better products because we are thinking about how our users interact with them, how they feel about that interaction. And that is the thing that gives them the sense of safety, creates security, versus scaring the hell out of them, which seems to be the history of most of security products. Like, oh my God, there's this thing happening on your computer. Click here and I'll take care of it. Or, oh my God, your computer did this thing. Like, you should change this thing. Like, that's what I mean by most security being a lie, is that we spent our time scaring the snot out of each other instead of actually creating things that give a sense of safety.
Yeah, instead of actually like changing the culture from the ground and making like everyone, as you mentioned before, thinking about let's build actually our software with the quality in mind. We kind of more fixing buyers.
Yeah. Well, and the unfortunate reality of human existence is people have gained a lot of power by scaring the hell out of other people. If you look at the history of the world, the people who become very powerful scared the hell out of a bunch of other people who gave them power to basically go protect us, kind of stuff. Whereas if you actually analyze the situation, you would find that the thing they're trying to scare you about isn't really that scary or isn't really that important. And I think that's a question of priorities. And I think this goes, you triggered, when you asked an earlier question, you actually triggered something that happened a few days ago. We're obviously planning for next year. And our CISO asked really good questions during our process. And he said, which one of these things is your priority? And, people sort of struggle with figuring that out. And his response was, if you can only do one thing, what's the one thing you're going to do? That thing is the priority. That's how you figure that out. Like, you want to know what your highest priority is? It's the thing that you can, if that's the only thing you can do, that's the thing you're going to do.
Yeah, it is always hard to pick a priority. I think especially with limited resources, which security teams usually have.
That is just a reality of life.
Yeah.
You're never going to have all the resources you want.
Yeah, for sure. And there is also one question I ask at the end of the podcast. If there would be a book that you could recommend, I mean, you already mentioned, some book authors like Simon Sinek. I know his book like Leaders Eat Last, etc. If there would be a book that you would really recommend for someone, especially someone starting in security to read, what would it be?
Oh, someone starting in security. Wow, that's a really good question. I think the first book that actually pops to mind is The Tangled Web by Michael Zaleski. I'm very lucky. I got to work with him at Snapchat. That was a really good book when it first came out. I haven't read it in a while, so I'm not sure it still applies. I still really love Writing Secure Code If You're a Developer by Michael Howard. Again, another guy I luckily got to work with at Microsoft, and then again later at Wells Fargo when he was advising us. And then on a sort of non-technical side, critical confrontations and critical what's it called? It's not meetings. If you look up critical confrontations, you'll find it, and that's how to have difficult conversations with people. And then the other one is critical conversations, and that's learning when really important stuff happens. And then on the flip side of that, there's a book called Influencer that I really love right here. You want to understand how to influence people or how marketers influence you? That's a great place to start. And then on the philosophy of how you get places, I highly recommend Marcus Aurelius. His Meditations it's a book on stoicism, but it asks questions about I don't have to have an opinion on everything. Why do I? Again, that's the why do I do what I do? So I think that's a starter pack for thinking like Curtis, maybe.
Okay, great. I'll put the links after when I release the podcast, and I'll find the one on the critical thinking too. Well, thank you so much, Curtis, for coming on the show. It was a pleasure chatting.
Thanks for having me, Alexandra.
And I hope I'll meet you again soon in Amsterdam.
Look forward to it.